I'm Mateusz, and I'm working on a company called Spartus. And from the conversation with some of you, I think that some of you might be already familiar with the tool that I'm working on, which is Jira. And if you have some feature requests, we can talk about it later on the on the party. But today, I would like to share with you some of the things and some of the learnings that we found out when we start to rewrite our application. So let's start from the beginning. This is how Jira looked like around 2 years ago when we started to do a UI update. And this is how it looks like right now. So as you may see, the colors are a little bit different. It's supposed to be simplified. It's supposed to guide you a little bit way. And as you may see, the navigation is not on the top, it's sidebar. And it appeared to not be as easy as one CSS rule. And we need to do something more. But what's the problem? So the first release was in the year 2002, which means that it's around 4 years before the jQuery, before the first version of jQuery appeared. The at that time, version of IE browser was around version 6, and the Firefox was in version 0.1, which is eventually called Firefox. So as you may see, the tool is pretty complex, and we could not rewrite everything in one moment. So following the idea of this presented by micro frontends, we also split our applications into pieces of functionality which can work together. So here we see 3 different pieces. So first one, the purple one, is navigation. Then you have the board view, and you have the issue view. And they are released, and the way how they work, they are completely independent. So it may appear that some of them are already rewritten and serve as some CDN, but some of them are not. They are served from the whole of the application. What is good in this situation is the fact that sometimes if you work, for instance, on the navigation, you may simply change the way how you provide your resources, and instead of some global CDN, you could use your own laptop and just replace this single application, single piece of functionality. So maybe the lines of code is not the best, maybe it's not the best metric, but we started the rewrite 2 years ago, and from that moment, we reached the number of 1.1 million lines of code. This means that if we all start to write some code right now, everyone would need to write around 2,000 lines of code in order to achieve that number, and it's including the CSS, it's including the comments. So we found out some problems that we need to scale up the way how we work in order to not create a big ball of mud and to not create spaghetti code. We needed to start cooperating in some way. So what's the first learning? The first learning is about creating the rules and sticking to them. So let's imagine that you started working on a completely new project, and you have a very small team which is collocated. You work together, you know each other. So you could start discussing about the architecture, about the project, how does it work, how does it look like, do you want to use React or Vue? It's pretty simple. If you add additional team and you start cooperating, it's also pretty simple. There is no time barrier. You just talk to each other and define something. But what if you start splitting your team across different time zones, if you start cooperating? Now the discussion needs to be somehow asynchronous. You could not allow to create one global meeting and define everything and decide on everything, because the problems change, the priorities change. So you need to provide a way in which you could decide on what's the way how we actually work. And why this is important? For instance, if you have a team and each of them has a different architecture, and each of the team has a different idea of how the app is built, it starts to be hard when you start switching the teams. So consistency brings a lot of value, because then you can start working on something different. Then you can, for instance, start owning a different part of the project, which you did not create, and it's easy for you just to switch in. And it also starts to be problematic if some of the people starts to just maybe leave, maybe go to another project. It's problematic because if, for instance, your architect disappear and you do not know why this decision was made, it's even hard to retrospect on that. So maybe we can learn from people who already solved the problem for us. So let's take as example designers. So we could have a design language. This is the page with our design system, when different designers can join your team. They know in which barrier they could work on. They know what's the brand. They know even what color or what's the way of the typing, or what's the, for instance, the presentation style. How to create a new features so they would be consistent for the users and would be like easy to digest for the users. And also design systems needs to evolve, needs to way to evolving. Thanks to that, you can create something new if there's opportunity to do so. So what would be the prerequisite for the rules for the front end? So for sure, they should be easy to create. So you do not want to spend time deciding on something. You just want to decide if you believe that this is the best option. They also should be easy to follow and easy to understand. So we ended up with this thing. It's not an orange. It's not a clementine. It's a very sweet type of mandarin, which is called tangerine. And why the tangerine? So let's imagine this was the R application. So let's imagine that each of the app is actually a tangerine. So it might be a little bit different flavor. It might be a little bit different color. Some of the apps are not following 100% of our rules. Some of them are actually consist of different ones. But still, when you swap between the teams or when you start working on something new, you know what's going on. You know how the project looks like. So you have the predefined set of rules, predefined set of requirements, which makes the changing of your application, makes the changing of your project pretty easy. So how do we come up with the idea for a rule? So it's a project which consists of 3 stages. First one is about deciding. So let's imagine that you have some problem. You do not know which library for CSS in JS you want to use. So you start to discussing. You start to look for already existing solutions which are on the internet. You look at the impact of your change. Does it change the work how only your team works, or does it change everything? So you are also start to think about reversibility. Is it possible to go back from this, or create like alternative solutions? And this is an example of this document. Like this is a proposal which specify how our integration test should look like. So we went with Cypress, and as you may see, there is a summary, there's a status of that, and there are a bunch of reviewers. So reviewers are people, there's a tangerine committee, which consists of some people from different parts of our organization, and for people who has some experience, who work with different teams, and who has the knowledge and decide that, okay, this is how we want to go, and this is how we want to write our applications. Oh, sorry. Okay. What's the next step? Next step is documenting. So you need to put all your information on a site. The idea is to open source it, but it's unfortunately not ready yet. But we want to document it, so when you want to retrospect on the idea, you can do so. So what are the examples of rules that we already agreed on? There's way how we standardize the way how we mock our requests. There is the way how standardize the way if we use components or pure components, standardize of how we import, how we use React imports. But there are also some bigger ones, like the structure of the application. And now is the last part, which is very important. So you need to make rules live, because in other way, it's no sense to just just decide on them. You need to have something which like force you and force others to follow the rules. Why it's important? Because some people might simply be not aware of that. Some people might just join your team and they are overwhelmed with the amount of information, and just to provide a guidance. So you could watch every change which happens. You could watch every PR which appears in your code base, but this does not scale. So you can also create a robot. And the first robot is called slint, which I believe all of you are already familiar with it, which allows you to lint your JS applications. But there is also one additional, the most important thing in slint, which is fix. So it allows you to create auto fixers for all your rules. And you can provide your own rules. And we already wrote a bunch of them in order to help us adapt the Tangerine rules. So let's start with the first one. So It might be silly, but it's very annoying when you have a props and the order of the props is totally random. So you have onClick, then you have some base URL, then you have 3 different types of booleans, so should, can, or is admin, then you get locale. So in our application, this piece of code would not be merged because it will fail a build, because the order of the props is invalid. And as you may see here, we can already fix this current file, and it will look better. First you have is, should, then can, so all the booleans, then some base URLs, another props, then on or any other handlers, and the last one, an internationalization object. So what's another thing that can be done? Let's imagine that you introduced a new library which solves the problems of many other people, and you want to forbid using the previous one. So no one would use here the fetch mock, the original fetch mock, but someone would use only the fetch mock created by us. It's quite easy. You just add here, you just add this particular library to the list of libraries that are forbidden. And there's one additional problem, the biggest problem in creating any kind of application, which is naming. So sometimes it's like problematic to create a name which would work for everyone and would not be the same in different pieces of application. So there we have also like Async tools for creating names. So here instead of sample with naming is hard, we have names that follow the directory structure, and we have even automatic way of creating an exports for oral applications if we want to flow type them. But let's ask a question: is ESLint enough? So sometimes sometimes ESLint would not allow us to do some things like it's not aware of the way how our directories are structured. It cannot like analyze the whole project from the directory structure perspective. So we created a tool called Stricter, which is available on GitHub, and it allows you to do some ESLint magic on the project structure level. How does it work in practice? So this is the example level structure of application. We have index.js, which is an entry on our application. Then we have view and style.js, which contains information about styled components. We do not use enzyme, unfortunately. We do not use emotion, unfortunately. But what if you add something which should not be here? For instance, file which is not allowed. Then if you push this code, it appears that there will be an error from Stricter that you could not match this particular file because it's not allowed. It shouldn't be here. Another example, we have the same directory structure, but the index file imports something from the style directory, which should not be possible. Only the view should know about how the given piece of application look like and how does it work. But what if we import it? It will also be forbidden because the description is pretty long, but index.js cannot depend on something from style.js. It can only depend on view, it can depend on some examples, or on subfile, subdirectory. So what's the second learning? Second learning is ownership. So sometimes Git blame is enough. It's an awesome tool, but what happens if you work on some part of code 2 years ago? What if you work on this part of code 3 years ago? You most probably would not remember what happened there. You were not aware of what's going on. So we need to create a tool which allows us to be on the top. So tool which would allows us to be updated with the current structure of the organization. So we came up with an idea of having a file which is named manifest.json. This is pretty simple. If it's put in some directory, this means that this directory is owned by this particular team. In our case, there is some application owner. There's also a team name. There is a Stride room, our communication room for our communication tool. There is a Jira project URL if you want to create an issue for us, and there's a list of maintainers. But the same manifest file, it's not enough, because what if you want to change something which is common? You need to go to each manifest.json file, check who is the owner, pick someone, add to the PR, which it's still does not scale, especially if you want to introduce something which is used everywhere. So we created a robot, and this one has a name, it's called Golem. Why it's Golem? Because it treats the application as your precious, and it would not allow you it would not allow other people to change your precious code. So how does it work? We have a protected application, and let's imagine that someone outside of let me in this case merge something and change something in the code which is not owned by me, but by someone else. Then Golem would add a comment on my pull request that hey, you touch some code, and it's protected it's protected and it's used by a different team. So you should not merge without their approval. They should be at least aware of the changes, and it automatically will pick some reviewer from the list of the maintainers. What's another thing? What if you work on a code and then just split because the old one is already duplicated? You work on something new. Then you can also mark this directory, this part of code, as deprecated. So in that case, Golem would notify you that, hey, be careful, you touched something which is already deprecated, so it's more probably good to contact someone else to get to know where should I migrate my changes. And it also gives you information about the actual files which are deprecated. Okay, so summary. The first learning is about creating the rules and sticking to them, because being opinionated is important in the way that consistency here is a key. It allows you to build a great team, and it allows you to start working on different things, and it allows you to cooperate each other in a very, very good way. And another thing is that you need to automate things. You cannot watch every change. You cannot be aware of everything which happens in your repository. It may happen if you have very, very small project, but it won't happen if your application is pretty big. And the last thing is about creating ownership. So if your code has already an owner, it's good because there is a person who is responsible for it. And if there is a problem, you may simply ask for it, and you may ask if you should fix it or not. So creating ownership implies the fact that you simply take care of the code. Okay, so thank you.
There are questions, believe it or not. So there's a couple of those. The first one is, what issue tracker do you use while working on Jira? Is it Trello?
Sometimes, yeah, but most cases, no, it's Jira, and yeah, we use our own instance, which is dogfooding instance, so it contains all the newest features.
Okay, so you are always on master.
More or less.
Okay, cool. Another question is, because you did mention about the prop types, that you sort them by the Boolean and then the rest and so on. What is the benefit of that?
So it might be something silly, but then if you start working on a different application, you just do not need to point it in the PR. That's the one thing that puts sometimes very small pieces of thing that you need to worry about. Sometimes the rules that we created are very simple, but still it allows you to do less thinking, do more thinking and less coding. So we need to be developers, so we need to work on the features, not blame each other if should be before can or something like that.
Okay, so basically the idea is that a machine should tell you what's the order of the props instead of you having to think about it.
Do not want to reorder it by yourself, and it's with very different things. So the same with imports. You do not want to think about what import should be the first one. You just need a machine which do the stuff for you.
Okay. Another question, I think it's a very interesting one. How long does your Jira's frontend build to production, as in millions of lines of code? If you add, I don't know, a semicolon somewhere, how long does it build take?
Around 30 minutes.
30 minutes.
I think so. That our frontend is the time is around 30 minutes. So in 30 minutes we received an updates, for instance, our dogfooding instance.
Nice. Another question. Honestly, I would ask it if it wasn't asked here. Is Golem open source?
Unfortunately not. But I asked the creator, maybe there is opportunity to do so, and maybe if there is a need for that from the
I
community,
mean, it
then
looks like it. It has a couple of upvotes, so. Did you consider renaming Golem to MC Hammer?
no.
That's a good one. Because on every pull request, right, you have all sorts of checkers like ASLint and I suppose many others. How long do those take?
Okay, so Estimate is like the first thing we use flow, which is pretty fast. Second thing is that we have a pre-commit hook which checks all file that you already touched and checks if there is bug, if there is an SL problem with that, which means that it do not need to run only, it runs only on the pieces of code that you already touched, which means it's pretty fast.
Okay,
and also it runs on the CI. That's why in 30 minutes it's everything, containing the integration test, containing also the checks.
Okay, another question is Jira's frontend a monorepo?
Yep, so we also considered idea of micro frontends, and our application is structured in a similar way, so we also have the fragments. But yeah, it's monorepo. Maybe it's not a mono project in this idea how it should build, but yeah, it's monorepo.
Okay, there was I think last question. How do you make breaking changes to your rules? Isn't an update even possible at this scale? I don't know if you decided to, okay, we're going to disallow or allow semicolons.
Yeah, so this is one of these big problems. So if there's a possibility to do this with a fix, then it's pretty easy. You just do one big change in the whole application, and then you're done. But then there is a problem, because what if someone diverges from the master and then want to merge? So for sure we can, like, for instance, block master for some moment, then make some change by one person, then allow merging to master. That's one thing. If there is something bigger, yeah, then you could opt in or opt out from some rules. So if you want, for instance, create a totally different application structure, you may create new rules and opt out from all of them in all existing applications. So then you need to rewrite them or at least adapt to the new standard.
Okay. One last question. Do I deserve to have a question? I mean,
yeah.
Finally. Okay, cool. So my question is, what do you use for end-to-end testing?
So we chosen Cypress as an end-to-end testing, and we are based on storybooks. So we created a storybooks, and then Cypress just clicks and end-to-end test them.
Okay. Thank you for an insight into Jira's behind the scenes. Thank you very much, Mateusz.